My first guest you all know. My next guest you all know.
Johnny Carson appeared endlessly patient, warm, and welcoming on television. Night after night, he made America feel like it was sitting beside an old friend. Someone who could laugh with you, listen to you, and turn even the dullest guest into an unforgettable moment. But behind the scenes, Carson enforced some of the strictest rules in late-night history. And if a guest broke one of those rules, the consequences were immediate, permanent, and often devastating. Some careers survived. Some were never the same. And a few guests didn't just disappear from The Tonight Show. They vanished from Carson's world altogether. Today, we're exploring not just who Johnny Carson banned, but what happened to these guests after the bans, and how their lives were shaped in the long shadow of television's most powerful host. To understand why Carson banned people at all, you have to understand the man behind the charm. Publicly, Johnny Carson was the king of late night, a performer who shaped the entire format of modern entertainment. A single appearance on his couch could launch a comedian's career overnight. Viewers saw a warm, calm presence who could make a room light up with one raised eyebrow. Privately, though, Carson was careful, guarded, and often painfully shy. He disliked confrontation. He avoided emotional conflict, and he fiercely protected his show from anything that might crack its polished surface. According to former Tonight Show producers, Carson's control of the show was absolute. If he didn't like a guest, if he felt someone embarrassed him, or if someone broke one of his unspoken rules, that person simply never returned. There was no announcement, no memo. One day, the door just closed, silently. And behind that silence was a list, an invisible one, of the people Johnny Carson decided would never sit across from him again. No one ever saw that list, and Carson never acknowledged it publicly. But the staff knew, the producers knew, and every Hollywood insider whispered about it. The Tonight Show had rules. Rules Carson didn't always explain. Rules he expected people to just know. One booker later admitted, "You could be America's biggest star, but if Johnny didn't want you back, that was it. No negotiations, no apologies. He was done." Sometimes his reasoning was understandable. Sometimes it was emotional. And sometimes the fallout for the guest was far more dramatic than the incident that caused it. Because when Carson banned you, it wasn't just a lost booking. It was the loss of the most powerful spotlight in entertainment. And the first person to learn that the hard way was Shelley Winters, one of Hollywood's most unpredictable icons.
She's a very good coach.
I know you from somewhere. Otherwise, I've seen you in some great movies. I can't remember which.
Well, maybe it was one we did together.
Shelley Winters was already a two-time Oscar-winning legend when she appeared on The Tonight Show in the 1970s. She was brilliant, dramatic, emotional, and famously unpredictable. On the night that sealed her fate, everything seemed normal at first. But Winters' mood shifted. She began interrupting Carson. She dominated the couch, she derailed his jokes, and then, in a moment that stunned both the crew and the audience, she ended up tossing a drink onto fellow guest Oliver Reed. Carson hated losing control of his own show, and that night he lost all of it. Multiple staff members later recalled that Carson walked off stage furious. He never scolded Winters, he didn't confront her backstage, he simply made the quiet decision. She wouldn't be invited back, and she never was. What happened to Shelley Winters after the ban? Winters continued working steadily in Hollywood, but insiders say the ban hurt her visibility. She joked publicly about her wild talk show moments, but friends claimed she regretted how they overshadowed her talent. She remained a respected actress, but she was never again a fixture on late-night TV. And for Carson, her name became shorthand for the chaos he refused to allow on his stage. But the next guest on his banned list was something very different. Not chaos, but comedy that hit too close to home.
That is the most self-effacing, humble entrance I've ever seen.
Charles Grodin was dry, sarcastic, and brilliant. His entire comedic persona revolved around being a bit irritated, a little annoyed, and perpetually unimpressed. Carson loved that energy until one night it went too far. Grodin came out swinging with his usual routine, treating Carson as the punchline. But something was off. Carson wasn't laughing. He wasn't playing along. And the more Grodin pushed, the more Carson seemed to withdraw. A former segment producer said that backstage Carson's mood was icy. He felt Grodin had tried to embarrass him in front of America. And just like that, Grodin was quietly banned. What happened to Charles Grodin after the ban? Ironically, the ban made him even more famous. Grodin leaned harder into his deadpan, antagonistic persona and built an extraordinary film career, Midnight Run, Beethoven, and countless others. Years later, Grodin admitted he didn't know if Carson was really angry or just playing. But Carson's reaction was unmistakable. In Carson's world, mockery, even comedic mockery, could cross a line. But the next band guest didn't mock Carson. She hurt him deeply, and the fallout became one of the great Hollywood tragedies.
Called Just Men on January 3rd. It's going to be 11 a.m. on the West Coast and 12 a.m. on the East Coast. You figure that one out.
Joan Rivers wasn't just another guest. She was Carson's chosen successor, the woman he handpicked to guest host The Tonight Show. He believed in her. He mentored her. He gave her the platform that defined her career. But in 1986, everything changed. When Rivers accepted an offer from FOX to host her own competing late-night program, she didn't call Carson first. She didn't warn him. He learned about it the same way the rest of America did, from the newspapers. For Carson, who had been abandoned repeatedly throughout his childhood and marriages, this wasn't business, it was betrayal. He immediately banned Rivers. He refused to speak to her ever again. And NBC followed his lead, effectively blacklisting her. What happened to Joan Rivers after the ban? Her Fox show collapsed within a year. She struggled emotionally and financially. Her husband, who produced the show, died by suicide shortly after the cancellation, a trauma Rivers carried for the rest of her life. She rebuilt herself from scratch, relentlessly touring nationwide, reinventing her style and ultimately becoming a comedy icon. But the heartbreak never left. In multiple interviews, Rivers said, "He never forgave me, and I never understood why he wouldn't take my calls." She did not appear on The Tonight Show again. Not until almost 30 years later, long after Carson's death when Jimmy Fallon invited her back. Her ban wasn't just a professional blow, it was the loss of someone she deeply admired. But Carson's harshest reactions weren't always emotional. It happened in 1987. Crispin Glover came out in platform shoes, wearing a wig, acting erratically, and delivering lines that felt more like performance art than conversation. Carson grew uneasy. The audience didn't know whether to laugh or panic. And then, in a moment replayed for decades, Glover threw a powerful sudden kick inches from Carson's face. Carson pulled back in terror. When the segment ended, he reportedly told staff, "I'm not having that nut back on." And he didn't. What happened to Crispin Glover after the ban? Glover insisted for years that he was playing a character, not attacking Carson. The ban didn't slow down his career. If anything, it added to his mystique. He continued starring in films, writing books, directing surreal art movies, and cultivating one of Hollywood's most unique identities. But he always expressed regret that Carson misunderstood the performance. Carson didn't misunderstand. He hated unpredictability. He hated feeling exposed. And no guest exposed him more profoundly than the one who wasn't trying to mock him, but to completely rewrite what a talk show appearance could be: Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman was unlike anyone who ever appeared on Carson's stage. He didn't perform comedy. He performed experiments, emotional, confusing, confrontational experiments. One night he'd be sweet and childlike. Another night he'd wrestle women. Another night he'd sit silently and refuse to break character. Carson admired creativity, to a point, but he never tolerated anything that disrupted his carefully timed rhythm. And Kaufman disrupted everything. Industry insiders say Carson banned Kaufman not out of anger, but out of self-protection. Kaufman was unpredictable, volatile, and uncontrollable. A live television risk Carson refused to take more than once. What happened to Andy Kaufman after the ban? He continued his groundbreaking career until his death in 1984. His absence from The Tonight Show became part of his legend. Fans still debate whether Carson respected him or feared the chaos he brought. Kaufman didn't need Carson's approval, but the ban remains one of the strangest intersections of creativity and control in television history. Because ultimately, Carson's bans weren't about spite. They were about something more vulnerable and more painful. Across all these stories, Winters, Grodin, Rivers, Glover, Kaufman, a pattern emerges. Carson didn't ban people because he was cruel. He banned them because he was fragile in ways the audience never saw. He hated humiliation. He feared betrayal. He despised losing control. And he guarded his show the way a wounded person guards the one place they feel safe. Biographers say that Carson's childhood, marked by emotional distance and a strained relationship with his mother, created a lifelong fear of vulnerability. On camera, he smiled. Off camera, he protected himself with silence, and when a guest violated those unspoken boundaries, he simply erased them from his world. What happened to the banned guests collectively? Some rebuilt their careers. Some reinvented themselves. Some carried the weight of Carson's rejection for decades. But none of them ever regained the enormous spotlight Carson controlled. And Carson himself? As he grew older, he began to reflect. In retirement, Carson retreated into a quiet life of sailing, reading, and watching old television clips. Friends say that sometimes when an episode featuring a banned guest replayed, Carson would fall quiet. Not angry quiet, but the quiet of someone thinking about a past he never resolved. He never publicly apologized. He rarely spoke about the bans. But privately, those close to him say he softened. There were relationships he wished he had repaired, conversations he wished he had allowed, and people he wished he hadn't pushed away. But Johnny Carson was a man who lived and died with his walls up, and his relationships stayed frozen in time, just like his image on the TV screen. Today, the stories of Carson's banned guests serve as a reminder of how powerful and how fragile late-night television once was. The Tonight Show wasn't just entertainment. It was a gatekeeper, a launching pad, a cultural force. Carson's bans shaped careers, altered destinies, and left emotional marks that lasted lifetimes. And yet, these stories also reveal something more human, that behind every powerful figure is a person afraid of being hurt, and behind every scandal or ban is a moment of vulnerability, for the host and for the guest. Modern late-night hosts still follow many of Carson's unspoken rules. Respect the desk, don't hijack the show, don't mock the host, and never, ever make the man in the chair feel small. These rules didn't come from a network policy. They came from Johnny Carson, a man America loved, a man Hollywood feared, and a man whose boundaries were carved into the history of American television. And as for the banned guests, they may have lost a seat on Carson's couch, but their stories, their careers, and their resilience have become part of a larger legend, the complex, unforgettable legacy of Johnny Carson's Tonight Show.